Peace, my people. You're tuning into I Must Be Bugging, where Black, gifted, and otherwise neurodivergent folks celebrate our special flavors. If you've ever questioned your perspective in a world built for the masses, welcome home. I'm your host, Sheldon Gay, and I appreciate you joining me on this journey as a late identified Black gifted man. Together, we'll rewrite the script on neurodiversity by celebrating our differences, challenging the status quo, and breaking free from old narratives that label us as deficient. In each episode, we'll explore the stories, experiences, and of course the curiosities of Black gifted adults and other neurodivergent people who are underrepresented or unidentified in a world where normal can also mean harmful. So continue with me on this journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and acceptance. I Must Be Bugging is creating safe spaces, sparking conversations, and making sure our voices are heard. Welcome to today's episode of I Must Be Bugging. This is your host, Sheldon Gay. I am always excited to have you all here, but certainly excited as well to have our guest. I'll tell you a little bit about them in a couple of seconds, but again, it's always good to continue to build community and discuss our unique experiences and learn about how we as neurodivergent folks are both showing up in the world, but also being supported. And so today is very much so going to be about that. We have, again, our special guest, Sydney Elaine Butler. Sydney is a HR professional, a founder, speaker, and HR and DEIA consultant at Accessible Creates. Also a DEIB facilitator. And it is Sydney's understanding that their professional purpose must be to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to be successful regardless of barriers in their way, and that they must, as a professional, remove these barriers. Sydney conducts training and consulting for other companies on how to be more accessible and inclusive from a human approach, and how to recruit and retain more diverse individuals through the lens of intersectionality, as well as human resources. As well as other areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion in an authentic manner at the company they founded called Accessible Creates, due to understanding the barriers that exist within the workplace for diverse individuals. Sydney is also a founding member of In Heart Site, which is a diverse community of professionals from across Canada, filling the gap in existing services for recent women immigrants, where they are on a mission to ensure that every woman who comes to Canada has the right skills and the right job at the right time. And so, again, I'm very, very excited. And I kind of did this out of order, but let me take a step back. Again, my name is Sheldon Gay. My pronouns are he, him. For those who are not familiar, I am a 42-year-old Black man. I have Black curly hair with kind of faded sides, although I need a haircut, so it's not so much faded right now. I'm wearing over-ear headphones and a kind of like a dark gray shirt. And so with that, thank you again for being patient with that out of order introduction there, Sydney. Thank you for joining us, Sydney. Welcome to the podcast.
Again, so much for helping me, Sheldon. I'm Sydney Elaine Butler. I'm wearing a white blazer, gray blouse, and I have long curly brown hair that's currently in twists. I am also wearing brown glasses, and I have headphones.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation. We've chatted and connected and really vibed. I think, it's exciting to speak with folks who get the importance of creating safe spaces for everyone, in particular, neurodivergent folks, as I continue to do this work of self-discovery, but also immersing myself excuse me, in the community, one of the things that just continues to boggle the mind is the fact that there are so many, even folks who would quote unquote consider themselves advocates, who really just
Mm,
don't get it, right? They don't understand the importance of language. They don't understand the importance of making sure that the experiences and the voices of neurodivergent people are the ones that are centered, right? Like not telling the stories from, some DSM report or something like that, right? Like, but really making sure that our experiences are told from our perspective. And so, um, to that end, why don't you tell us about yourself and your work, and whether or not you consider yourself neurodivergent?
yeah, so I studied human resources at school while also working in a recreational environment, helping kids, teens, and adults with disability that are also neurodivergent. And while studying HR, I was like, this seems most inclusive and accessible to people like me. Working in the recreational environment, seeing how my coworkers and my supervisors treated our participants versus how they treated me, or they're like, "Why do you get along so well with the neurodivergent participants?" I'm like, "Newsflash, me too." Um, and it was just, and so I actually I got was kind of getting frustrated, so I kind of disclosed that to them. That was like, well, I'm autistic too. I'm and stuff like that. That I had speech therapy growing up and all these different things, and they're like, oh, then you shouldn't be taking care of them. And there's a huge disconnect. And so I was like, okay. So I thought I would go into HR and make HR more inclusive and accessible as an HR generalist or HR coordinator. But I graduated during 2020, and so that was
Mm,
quite difficult.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so I was lucky enough to actually I was constantly putting myself out there. I was like, I know I had to go the extra mile to get recognized and to get noticed. And so I was volunteering for a local HR agency, a professional designation, all these different things, to put myself out there, get my name known. And so then it worked.
yeah.
I worked at an HR startup, worked as an HR clerk at a nonprofit over the summer of 2021. And then I realized I could do more, and I liked HR, and I liked when I was making HR more inclusive and accessible, like I knew I
Mhm,
would. And that's really what drove me and drove my passion. And so I started Accessible Creates, and I founded Accessible Creates by trainings. That's how I started. And like, hey, a lot of companies that are talking about this more, talking about digital accessibility, which is so important, but no one's really
mhm,
talking about neurodiversity, disability on a day-to-day basis. And
mhm.
so I decided to do so. And so a lot of times it's funny that you mentioned people like a lot of people are fighting on our behalf, and some people message me like, "Oh, you're just fighting on our behalf," or "Oh, you're
Right.
not a white woman that has kids that are autistic." I'm like, I am the artistic child. I am
Yeah.
biracial. My
Right.
mom.
Right.
I went to speech therapy. And it's a lot of people now also talking about it. They were diagnosed later in life, and that's super
Mhm,
important. And connecting the dots of realizing, oh, these are the why I was like this as a child. But
mhm,
I've always known, and when I knew when I got the supports, I would do well, and when I didn't, I wouldn't do well. And
mm.
so I feel like I have very unique perspective to be able to do this work that I do.
Yeah. That's there's a few things in what you just shared that just jump out at me. Um, I think the first thing is just to tap into the fact that people. It's like the thing that came to my mind just now that made me even laugh is people asking the question or saying you don't
Mhm,
look autistic, right? And it's like, but what does that really mean, right? Like
mhm,
how are you supposed to tell just by whatever what someone's wearing or whatever, right? Like is there um a a handbook for what autistic or just generally neurodivergent people are supposed to look like? um so tell me a little bit more about like what that has felt like, I guess, particularly knowing that I heard you mentioning, the speech therapy. So
mhm.
that there were things that, um, you know, were different for you. So yeah, tell me a little bit more maybe about that experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I saw this thing on Twitter years ago, and it was like we didn't realize we were neurodivergent as children. We just know we had special accommodations.
Mm, mhm,
And
mhm, mhm.
I was like, yep. Like I
Yeah.
knew, but I also didn't know sometimes. I was just like, oh, I have to go to speech therapy in the middle of class. I'll be back.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right.
um, and now I think there's so many white advocates in
Mhm,
the neurodiversity space.
mhm,
And so I
mhm,
think a lot of
mhm.
people, it's kind of like, I don't want to say racism and ableism at the same time. It's kind of what it is.
I was gonna say, I mean, you can say them at the same time.
But it's so hard sometimes. And so as people, like I have had companies reach out to me and then like, oh, we went with you because you're a person of color, or we didn't go with you because we really had a white lady come in and talk about it. And just
Mm,
seeing the difference, and it's like, well, okay, if you okay, you know,
right,
if that's how you feel, I can't control anything about that.
right, right.
But it's like I am biracial. You know,
Mhm,
like my dad is white, uh, but I'm still a person of color,
mhm,
and
mhm,
so
mhm,
it's so frustrating when people only want to see you as one dimension. And I
mhm.
think that goes for race, for being neurodivergent, not being neurodivergent.
Yeah. No, I think.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
so yeah, so I was just like, it's so frustrating when people only see you one dimensionally. It's like, nope, I'm a whole person, and I'm putting my
Exactly.
whole heart into this. So,
Right. No, that's yeah. I mean, this experience for me has made me even more aware of the way in which society like is driven or aligned with or like it's just how much binary experience people just just like I said, how the lens through which we see stuff through, right? And so a lot of people are like, either you are white or you're not, right? It's like either you are this or you're not. It's like, well, it's possible one to be multiple of these things at once, right? Like I'm not even me, it's like I'm not just a black man, like I have other aspects to my
mhm,
existence, and those things all show up when I enter into the room. And I know that I've been frustrated at times when, like you said, folks just see this one thing about you, or what they perceive to be about your experience. And the funny part is a lot of the times what they perceive is not even, for even just that sliver, is not even the full picture. So
mhm,
it's one of those things where you're like, okay, you know I gotta fight through all that to be seen. And one of the things I've talked with folks about is at at the core of our human experience is the desire to be seen. So every time you have one of those interactions, it is, at least a small t trauma, right?
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I can only imagine for you, um, just dealing with that. And it's, interesting as well. Again, hearing you talk about the fact it's like you didn't necessarily have a term for it when you were
Mhm.
younger, but then now, um, picking up on that and making that a part of who you are. I know. I guess one of the questions that comes to mind around that for you is, um, how much of that, like, how do you, and this is kind of a question that maybe I was going to
Mhm.
get into it later, but I guess I'll get into it now. Is like, how do you balance that? Making these things, identifying with these things,
Mhm.
while at the same time, you know, realizing that you're a whole human being. Like you're not any one of these things
Mhm.
singularly, but you're an entire human being. How do you kind of find balance there, if that makes any sense?
It does make sense. I think, excuse me. I think really understanding that I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think when I first started as an entrepreneur, I was like, everyone has to get it. Everyone has to get me. Everyone has to,
Mm-hmm.
person me. Now I'm just like, I'm healing my inner child. I'm healing my inner
Mm-hmm.
teenager. I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so is it frustrating? Yes, or it's like people only want to see that, but people only see what they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't control. Like I can put out all of my content and all my things to
Mm-hmm.
promote myself and to, but if people only want to see what they want to see, And
Mm-hmm.
as long as I'm proud of myself and proud of what I'm putting out there at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
You don't realize that you just spoke a word to me, and I'm sure to other people. Like, it was concise, it was straightforward, but like there was so much beauty in what you said around, you know, initially, right? The experience is everybody's got to see me, right? Like I'm here, you got to see all of me. Like I want you to see me, and then getting to that point where you realize you could, put out bat signals and billboards and do all the things, and fundamentally, people, like you said, are going to see what they want to see. And when you get to that point of acceptance, it's freeing. There's frustration still, right? Like it's not as
Mhm,
if it's not challenging, but there's freedom in that to go and just really be you, right? And really focus on, just like you said, pouring from your heart into the world, as opposed to trying to um kind of force the message, if
mhm.
that aligns with what you're saying. So um that is definitely a thing for me. I know a core wound for me is feeling misunderstood and unheard. And so I am definitely working through that. So again, you definitely spoke a word to me just now.
I
Uh,
feel like before we continue, I think
Let
that's
me
a
go ahead.
lot of us. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of us have that root in being misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think once you realize you understand yourself and I, as a teenager, I always wanted to be understood, but I
Mm-hmm.
was a chameleon and I was like, I want to be
Mm-hmm.
understood by
Mm-hmm.
different groups. So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like, that was very damaging to my mental health. I did silly things I shouldn't have done, all
Mm-hmm.
these things. I'm like, I understand that I might have made mistakes in the past. I might have, messed up royally, but I know who I am now. I know that I'm fundamentally a good person and I want to keep growing and improving and
Mm-hmm.
getting better. And that's all I can do.
Right. Yeah, that deep inhale, that was again me just really. I mean, you're. I hope that people are really feeling that, because again, I think it's a massive truth about life, and it's the maturity, it's the healing that's
Mhm,
coming through, right? Because um, I mean, even talking about being a chameleon, one of the things that's always in my mind, and I know a lot of people, particularly who are late identified, one of the kind of telltale questions is people going back and trying to assess, well, what part of
mm,
me was the mask versus like me, and um, you know, that's a difficult thing to kind of delineate, and I think again it goes back to um, even one of the things that's just sort of elusive in general in life, which is, scientists talking about what's nature versus nurture, right?
mhm,
Um, but I think, again, your message of, you know, just one, grace for the journey that you took and how you kept yourself safe, whether it be being a chameleon in a way that was showing your different colors, or being a chameleon in a way that helped you to blend in so that you could be just simply be
mhm,
safe. um but giving yourself grace around that, because there could be a lot of judgment for, like, Sheldon, you were over here with this group, this crowd that really wasn't good for
mhm.
you, or you didn't really like, right? um but giving yourself grace around that, I think, is really powerful. And again, making space for your full self, I think, is a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing that. And if you have anything else to share about that, feel free to. um Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I said it all there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
One of the things, to a little bit kind of go back to talking about the work that you do.
Mhm,
um I've had conversations with folks who are more so on the, I guess, kind of like recruiting side. It sounds like you're
mhm,
more so on internal HR helping them figure out how to do their job better, things of that nature. And if I'm misunderstood, like certainly correct me, but tell me a little bit about that experience. Like if what I said is true, and you're focused more so on improving that internal experience, um, what's that like? What's the difference in that side of things versus either I'd say just the simple job seeking
Mhm.
aspect.
Yeah, so there is a lot of people doing great work helping, recruitment be better. I do that a bit because it's still internal HR
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
be external facing to the potential candidates and the
Hmm.
candidates. But really, on a day-to-day basis, helping HR understand that you already have neurodivergent and disabled people in your workforce.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
you people are like, oh well, we can't retain. We're trying to recruit and attract candidates, and like, well, you have to look internally first and
Hmm.
see what are you doing for your people. Because you
Yep.
already have people that are neurodivergent in your team. That, do they feel comfortable enough to disclose to you that they're neurodivergent?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
there seems to be that disconnect between, oh, we want to recruit people, but it's like we're already in your workforce. We already have
Yeah.
these jobs. We're
Right.
not getting the support we need, and
Right.
turnover is higher.
Hmm.
And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, why is our turnover? We keep losing employees. It's like, well, are you supporting them the way
Right.
you need to be
Right.
supported? Are you giving them the resources?
Hmm.
For example, using software for someone that needs to take notes. How
Hmm.
you could give them that tool, or
Hmm.
have all these different things. And it's like, oh, but that's too expensive. It's like it's too expensive for the turnover, for
Right.
not
Right.
retaining them, and it's like, so you want to recruit people, but then you don't have the resources in place, so you don't want to provide them these resources to be successful once they're actually in your organization. Or looking at policies and procedures. That's that's kind of my nerd area. That's my favorite
Hmm.
area. Looking at them, being like, do you have an accommodation policy?
Hmm.
Is it up to date?
Hmm.
An accessibility policy. Is it beyond medical? I think a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
times
Hmm. Hmm.
and stuff like that. Breaking it down. Do you coworkers? Do the coworkers know how to interact on a day-to-day basis?
Hmm.
But and someone asks for support, or that looks different every day. Because for an example, a coworker sees you doing a task, and then one day you might do it a little differently, or you have to take more breaks. And they're like,
Hmm.
"Well, oh, Johnny's just being lazy today." It's like,
Right.
no. For example,
Right.
I also have CPTSD. So I also have CPTSD. No, it's the anniversary of a very traumatic day for them.
Hmm.
They need to be slower. They need to be more. Take their time. It's okay, and
Hmm.
just be mindful of that.
That is, again, I just, as much as possible, I want to kind of beat that drum, because one of the things that I believe is super powerful in helping to create awareness around why this stuff matters is because people look at behaviors as if they are, they're very familiar with just saying, oh, this person's lazy, or this person's just being dramatic, or this person's just being whatever, whatever, whatever. And it's like nobody, or not nobody, right? But like
Mhm,
when you go deeper and you realize, oh, wait, such and such is, you know, mom passed last year on this date, or
mhm,
this is the anniversary of whatever, right? Like it starts to make much more sense why they've been kind of antsy or irritable the
mhm,
last week, whatever it is, right? And now there's an opportunity to go back to this, this word grace, and say, okay, how do we support them during this time? Not just say, yo, get your stuff together, show. Like, what are you doing? Like, a month ago you were doing, whatever, pushing out 100 widgets, and this month or this week you're down to 50. Like,
mhm,
get it together. So yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, that's just super powerful. Like, the phrasing is that I hear a lot as well, that I love, is around, you know quote unquote misbehavior
mhm,
is a sign of unmet needs, right? Like that just is,
mhm, mhm,
that that to me is like super powerful, whether it be with adults or children or whatever, because like I said, a lot of people just only see the judgment in people's actions. um and if you have something to say about And I don't know if you have anything else to say about that. Otherwise, I was going to ask you about some of the things that specifically happened, but wanted to make sure that I left some space there for you to um,
Yeah, I
comment on that
think
if you do.
just like you said, understanding that even if neurodivergent or not, we all have different support levels,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Mm-hmm.
and require different support in different days. And to this huge area of performance management, it's like, well, someone could, going into depression, feeling like you
Mm-hmm.
said, like lost their mom, it's anniversary of their mom's death, all these different
Mm-hmm.
things, and realizing that people are human,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that giving them and checking in and having that conversation. I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people like to judge from afar when it's like actually
Yeah.
have the conversation, and people like in if you start asking people like, oh, well, you didn't tell me it was wrong, or you didn't tell me, but I know something's wrong, but
Yeah.
it's like sometimes people are not in the mood to tell you if it's wrong in that moment, but just when you start having the conversations, like, oh, so and so actually cares enough to ask, not
Right.
and
Right.
so that's where the magic happens. Even though
Yeah.
they don't tell you right away,
Yeah.
what's wrong, it's gonna start being like, oh, they didn't just because people can, when you look at someone, you can tell it's like, oh, are they thinking about me or like judging me and all these things you get in your head. And
Mm-hmm.
if you are
Mm-hmm.
judging them, you put
Yeah.
right
Right.
face to that. And then
Right.
but if you ask that question instead, they might say, I don't want to talk about it, or just, and then once and then they sit with that, like, oh, they actually asked me and be able to move forward. And then you ask them again another time, and they might actually tell you this time what was wrong, or,
Yeah.
just breaking down and having that really human relationship.
Yeah. You just reminded me as you were saying that as well, going back to another key point that you talked about, right? It's like when you were talking about people looking at line item cost as opposed
Hmm.
to kind of the holistic cost, right?
Hmm.
It's like, you know, and the cost in this situation, as you talked about that, is sort of the very real, like if it was some sort of software
Hmm.
or if it was, whatever, providing
Hmm.
earplugs or whatever it is, right? Like whatever that sort of line item cost is. But then there's sometimes people get worried about how much time is being spent on this and think about it from that perspective. But when you look at it and say, well, if I took an extra 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, to just use that to check in with people, how much money am I going to save? How much would productivity go up? Right? Like
Hmm.
these are the types of ways in which people, if you again, if that's what your frame of mind is, right? Like there are real benefits there. But um you also reminded me of a corporate experience that I had where um there was a point at which I wasn't doing any on camera, like,
Hmm.
whatever, video calls. So we were having these meetings and I wasn't on camera. And so my manager at the time, and I think I might have mentioned this on a call on starting a podcast episode before, but if not, I had my manager at the time was kind of like chastising me for not being on camera. And like, yeah, Sheldon, we haven't seen you on camera for a while, and I need you to be a team player. And da, 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 da. And I just let her go on and on and on and on. And I said, did you ever ask me why I was off camera?
Hmm.
And she's like, no. And I said, well, let me tell you. And I told her about how I basically had this like racist comment that was made to me. And this is during, pandemic times.
Hmm.
And, where you couldn't get your hair cut and people, it was a comment that was made about my hair and different things like that. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go off camera. And I said to her, he's like, you didn't even ask. And I was like,
Hmm.
this behavior, Sheldon not being a team player, does that really something that should have stood out to you, right? Like, but you
Hmm.
never checked in. And she was apologetic, but at the same time, it was like we need people using that frame of mind that says, this doesn't seem like Johnny or Lisa or whatever,
Hmm.
Sydney, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't seem like them. Um, Let me check in with them before I'm kind of like uh, using a criticizing or judgmental tone about their behavior. Particularly, I'll say, as you think about with neurodivergent people and with the intersectionality of just the trauma around um, I'll just say being misunderstood and sometimes being very sensitive to how people are perceiving you, that is really important that somebody actually cares to check before they just, you know, uh, make an assumption, and where you're not having to spend so much time thinking, how am I showing up for these people? Do they hate me? Are they seeing my, like, if you feel safe enough where you're like, you know what, uh, whatever, Sydney's going to check in with me,
Mhm.
and I'm glad that when Sydney checks in with this, Sydney really cares. You know, I'm gonna, I'm not going to give Sydney necessarily all the details of my experience, right, like down to the nitty gritties, but at least I'm going to share. Hey, yeah, I am a little bit troubled right now, and trust that it's not going to kind of work against me. So, um, I mean, I guess to that point, one of the questions that I have, and I know that you are doing some work specifically focused
Mhm.
on women, like, what are some common things that, I guess, women, whether they be neurodivergent or disabled or whatever, like, what are some of the common things that they're, looking for that are often missing once they find themselves within a workplace?
I think ultimately support, like that applies for anyone,
Hmm.
but it seems to be more of a burden on women and for that are disabled and neurodivergent. That's like, well, they have to have themselves sorted. They got the job. Um, they had to be like rock stars and have to perform at a certain level every day. Like
Hmm.
even more so than men. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so there's like the added pressure and understanding that which are like they want to talk out. Some with the man sometimes like, oh, I just need this, and then give it to me. I'll be good. But sometimes, with women, they want to express how they feel and why they feel that way, and so
Hmm.
that's what the
Hmm.
support looks like for them. And the manager's like, well, I don't have the time to hear just put your feelings and hear about X, but it's like
Right.
really understanding that's like, no, I have a valid concern, and taking the support when required and the feeling and the vent, seriously.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that it probably took so much kind of masking takes a lot of strength, like, bottling that in and keeping that in.
Hmm.
And, you want to do your best at your job, but you feel like you can't. And you just kind of, you also don't want to be judged.
Hmm.
And so balancing those two things. So creating that space where people can talk about how they felt and having the support amongst each other.
Yeah. Yeah. You just reminded me about some of the quote unquote fast paced environments that I've
Hmm.
worked in, and watching women who want to rise up those ranks, right? Like, there are a lot of these, like,
Hmm.
fast growing startups who got like all kinds of just great things, whatever going on, and seeing women kind of conform to a
Hmm.
certain set of behaviors, right? To feel like that's the only way that they can kind of get up. But it's like, again, people are all human. There are all kinds of diversities and experience and needs. And if everybody's trying to fit this entire box, like, I see some of them end up struggling, right? There's meltdowns. I've had people, a couple of my friends talk about, they found out that they were neurodivergent because they had these breakdowns.
Hmm.
And they were like, well, what the heck's going on? Like, I'm doing all these different things. I've got whatever going for me. What could I possibly have going on? And then they go and talk to somebody, and it's like, oh, I've been not just trying to like fit a square peg into a round hole, but like, there's a whole nother layer of, things that are going against my very nature that I've been doing to try to succeed. And yeah, finding environments where you can't, like, it's not uh taboo to both be quote unquote emotional and
Hmm.
um assertive, or uh just generally successful, right? um I think that is, I can certainly see, I've literally seen that as a challenge, but I can certainly kind of, whatever, theoretically, um see that as a challenge. And I think that's a good, kind of call out on that. um
And also, with sometimes being neurodivergent or having disabilities and being a
Hmm.
woman, I think a lot of times people assume that the promotion has to always be management. And it's like sometimes you don't want to
Hmm.
be managers. And so
Hmm.
it's like, but we want
Hmm.
to grow and to be developed
Yes.
in our position and get more responsibility within that position or learn more things that can help us succeed down the line. It's like, I don't want to be a manager right now. I never want to be
Right.
a manager, but I want new skills. I want to try new things.
Yeah.
And so having, I think there's always the vertical promotion. There should be more of a horizontal promotion as
Yeah.
well.
No, I think that's, and I'm trying not to like digress too much, but what you reminded me of is um I was listening to this podcast called what is it called? They'll hold on, I'm about to look at it right now. I
Mhm.
think it's called They'll Be All Right. Hold on. This is they'll be they'll be fine, right? And it talks about um gifted and otherwise, like I guess neurodivergent experiences, but particularly gifted experience that you or I guess, well, anyway, sorry, I was trying to like not necessarily say gifting and then make sure that I included other high IQs, but I guess technically at that point you'd be like twice exceptional, multi exceptional, right? But that's neither here nor there. The point being is that with a lot of us, what they'll say is, oh, they're so smart, they'll figure it out, right? And so they don't provide support. And it's like, well, again, I'm still a human being. And on this episode, they were just talking about, um, you know, maybe your aspirations aren't to be CEO. Like I may have the all this complexity and whatever, 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 but like maybe my goal isn't to be the CEO of the company. I just want to be able to learn new things. And it can be difficult to make that case because it can seem like, what do you mean you don't want to be, VP? Like,
Mhm.
you know, it can be hard to make that case to move laterally or, whatever kind of dimensionality you want to add on top of it, right? Without having it to necessarily be um, a traditional vertical promotion. And I think neurodivergent people, because our minds work differently, um, and our aspirations can be different, it can be challenging to, again, to make that case and advocate for yourself in that way. I don't know if that aligns with your experience or what you were saying, but that's kind of what came to mind.
Yeah, that completely aligns.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. So hopefully, like I said, as folks through your work, certainly, but as they listen to this, that we find more spaces to do that. You know, are there? I want to kind of talk to you about what are maybe some advancements that you've seen, maybe as it relates to some of the software you were talking about, but as it relates to like accessibility and making more accommodations for neurodivergent and the disability needs in the workplace. Like, have you seen any kind of cool new things that are either on the horizon or that people have started to use in the last couple of years?
It's interesting. So AI is a very interesting
Mm,
advancement
mm-hmm,
that I think can be beneficial if used properly.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and I think, for example, like how I talked about, like taking notes or
mm-hmm,
making coherent things out of, like sometimes I'm guilty of doing run-on sentences in my work, and I'm like,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
darn,
Yeah,
like
right.
when it,
Listen. Mm-hmm.
because that's the you type like you speak, and
Right.
so something being out loud, but that takes too long. That so putting it through an AI or the Grammarly, for example,
Mm-hmm.
having that tool, and it's like, oh, it's now a perfectly grammatical sentence, and it's all good to go, or broken
Yeah.
into different, and so all these different tools are using. Yeah, I think that's a huge one right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different applications of AI,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
so I think and companies are like, well, we have to kind of like regulate it and have like policies about it. It's like, and it's like, ugh, more work, but it's like if it's gonna help someone, it's gonna help your company.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you not have these things in place?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it always sometimes it's interesting because like screen readers, sometimes people like, it's mostly for people that are visually impaired, but it could also be beneficial to neurodivergent folks.
Hmm.
And so providing these different resources, and I think going with that as well, it's not directly a tool, but sometimes companies kind of like to reuse the technology they already use or the tools they already paid
Hmm.
for like, oh, we had another employee that, required that, so you can all you need it too. It's like, but I don't need that support. I don't need that function, you know? And so that seems to be that disconnect that, oh, well, we accommodated some of them as autistic before, so here's all the things they, got done.
Hmm.
It's like, I don't need those. I need these things instead.
Right.
And so just being able to have those conversations and not assume that you know what people need to be accommodated. And I think you can try those things that worked before. And if one works or two work, awesome.
Right.
But don't assume that it's going to work the same as it did
Yeah. So I was going to start talking about the
before.
equitable tech because that's definitely a
Mhm,
passion of mine, but you also reminded me of a question that I had about what are some things that employers kind of, and I'll just even say, like, let's just assume that they're well meaning, but that they still kind of get wrong about what it means to truly provide a excuse me, a a safe space and accommodating space for folks. Like it sounds like in that case, right, people are like, oh, you know this is our neurodivergent package, right? And you kind of just like
Yeah.
throw it at people, and it's like,
Mhm.
thank you, but I that doesn't really meet
I
my
think
needs. So
ultimately you know, that is what people, employers don't get, that it's not a one size fits all
hmm.
approach. Every,
Hmm.
and I think that's frustrating for the employer because they're like, well, we spent all this money already, and it's like, no one's saying you're not going to use it ever again. You
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
use it down the
Hmm.
line,
Hmm.
and everyone's experience is different. Again, when you look at the intersectionality of it, you know, some people might know and have access to these resources already, and they use them in their daily life,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
they have more privilege, and so they know, what, oh, I need this tool, this tool, this tool. While there's other people that might not have access to technology, and it's more not technology based, but it's just a day to day thing, or just check ins, or just little things. It's like, oh, I need to take a 5 minute break at the top of the hour, at the
Hmm.
bottom of the hour
Hmm.
to not get so overwhelmed.
Right.
And so just really understanding where the people are coming from and listening to people when they say what they need to be
Hmm.
successful. I think that's a huge one. Employers were like, well, I'm the employer, so what I say and what I think you need to be successful is law. And it's like,
Right.
people
Right.
know what they need to be successful.
Right.
And sometimes they are scared to know when they need to be successful, or they like, oh, I knew I had to be successful in my other job or in other
Hmm.
aspects of my life, but in this scenario, I'm not really sure. Let's
Hmm.
figure it out together. You
I
know?
Yeah, I think that's the key part right there is finding folks who are legitimately committed to figuring it out together. And
Hmm.
to be frank, like, or realistic, right? It's not that an employer is going to be able to meet every single one of
Hmm.
your needs, right? I think we have to kind of put that out there, but at the same time, I don't know that fundamentally that's what everybody's looking for. I think fundamentally people are looking for just that energy that says that I
Hmm.
care, that I am trying, that I'm willing to be
Hmm.
creative about what could we do. Okay, we don't have a budget to give everybody whatever it is, right? Like
Hmm.
everybody can't get noise canceling headphones, maybe, right? But like, okay, maybe we could, I don't know, provide a small stipend that helps to, if you do want them, or I don't know, right?
Hmm.
Like there's some other ways in which you can, maybe there's a quiet room, right? And
Hmm.
that is something they say, oh, okay, yeah, we can just, block that room off and we don't have to buy, whatever. So I think that's really what people are looking for. And it's at least the phase at which we're at now. Um, kind of even touching a little bit back into like the AI or other advanced solutions, where it'll get to the point where there's customization is going to be a lot easier, um, because these tools will be able to kind of be a jack of all trades, right? In the
Hmm.
in the future, but in the meantime, again, just simply having the space where someone's saying, I know that you may have some needs, like let's talk through them and see what we can do. um Versus, like you said, just giving them this bucket of stuff and saying, look, I don't know what to tell you, this is the this is the package, take it or be unaccommodated, right? So
Hmm.
um and just to kind of touch a little bit back on what you were saying earlier too about, I do respect the fact that there are some folks who are mindful of the fact that, um, whether they be employers or, like I said, it probably is going to tend to be some of us who, going back to the part about, like, nothing for us without us kind of energy,
Hmm.
right? There are some of these tools that are not built with us at the center. And so, um, I think a lot of employers too one of the things that comes to mind is, you know, there were these gloves that somebody had invented that were supposed to automatically like translate ASL,
Hmm.
which high level sounds great, right? Like, okay, I can use these gloves, then everybody can kind of have a much easier conversation, fine. But one of the things that came out of it was that some of the translations weren't accurate,
Hmm.
right? Um, you know, Again, it was ASL didn't work necessarily for all versions of sign language, right? So how do you make sure that um, the tool that you're using isn't also just creating another layer of like
Hmm.
othering, or kind of, did you really care, or did you just kind of like see some cool tech and like threw it at people? Like, that's, as folks know, that my primary business that I'm growing is, Takano Solutions, where my focus is on building equitable tech and making
Hmm.
sure that we don't just throw stuff at people, um and think that just because it's cool that it really isn't simply replicating the harms that already exist in society.
Yeah, I think with that, it's like understanding that while it's cool, while it's advancing, it's doing things that it couldn't do before. Is it serving the need of the individual that needs it the most?
Mhm.
Is
Mhm.
it recognizing the if an employer is using it, using the ASL glove, for example, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
it's like, and then the employee's like, actually, it's not working yet. Some of the
Right.
things,
Right.
and just taking that and not taking that as an insult towards you with the
Mhm.
product. It's just, hey, this is not meeting my needs, and that's
Right.
okay.
Right.
Let's see other ways that can better meet my needs.
Yeah.
And as when you build your company, it's just like understanding the intersectionality of it all, the
Mhm.
customization. Have a base product, have a base technology, and then be able
Mhm.
to modify it because, and it's okay in understanding that we're gonna make mistakes. We're human, and just trying
Yeah.
to figure things out together at the end of the day, and realizing that, okay, you tried this solution, you tried this accommodation, it didn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah. That's again a really good point. And I think, again, beyond HR and just into general life, um, the idea of creating a space where we can make mistakes and not get
Hmm.
defensive about it, right? Because there's a lot of times where people are like, well, this is, they get all defensive. We spent all this money. We tried to help.
Hmm.
Blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, I hear you. Particularly, I find this to be most difficult with folks when they feel like we're this progressive company, or we're this,
Hmm.
I'm the good guy. Like, wow, how are you kind of criticizing
Yeah.
me? And it's like, without kind of, pushing back too much, maybe that is true, but that doesn't mean that you are, beyond reproach, or that this thing couldn't,
Hmm.
you know, work better for this person. And if that's the center of what you are um, really focused on, is does this meet a need, as opposed to um, look at me for
Hmm.
the the uh, caring and altruistic person that I am, right?
Hmm.
Then that conversation, I think, goes a lot different. And I think, again, I'd say for me, um, I don't know how many times, even in the last month or so, I've said to people, they've been apologizing for stuff that probably doesn't even need to be apologized for, but I've said to them, I trust your heart. So even if I thought that was, what you
Mm-hmm.
meant, like we would have been able to have a conversation because I know that you've built that rapport with me where I know that you just misstepped. Let me share this with you. Let me tell you how to kind of do something different, but like we don't need to be uh I don't need to block you on social media or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um so um kind of starting to round things out, what are in your mind, if you can think of like, maybe two or three things that you'd say are keys to neurodivergent healing and thriving, that you think that folks should be aware of?
I think kind of how we talked about earlier when you like talking about how, oh, I was with that group of people that didn't even like it, that were not good for me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way about some certain people in some certain situations. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think understanding that you did the best with what you could at the time
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and what you knew at the time. And so really understanding that, and it was just a lesson, just part of your story. Add that to
Mm-hmm.
the, and being patient and compassionate with yourself. It's like, and especially with the masking as well. It's like
Mm-hmm.
understanding that you did what you did to survive and to be safe
Mm-hmm.
and to do the best you could. And sometimes it didn't look like your best, but that's okay. And so
Mm-hmm.
really taking that moment to realize that, you are who you are and you are who you were, and really
Mm-hmm.
understanding that it's okay.
Yeah.
Just giving yourself that compassion and giving yourself that moment to be like, I know I messed up. I know all these things. I shouldn't have gotten involved with those people. I shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z, but
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. I know. And then especially with the masking of people, or the people that later diagnosed, or even if you knew from a young age, because you still mask from a young age because you
Mm-hmm.
want to be safe. And so by masking, it's like it's okay that you had to mask. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay if you're still masking. I think people are like, oh well, I'm not, it's like okay, it's okay that you have to mask sometimes. It
Mm-hmm.
is draining, it is tiring, but you have to do what's best for your safety. And
Mm-hmm.
so, really, just being patient with yourself and realizing that I think a lot of times people also think that you have to look one way to be neurodivergent or autistic or get all these different
Mm-hmm.
things. And it's like your experience with being neurodivergent is going to be different based on who you were, who you are, your family, your background, all these different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
just understanding that the way, your neurodivergent shows up is okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I mean, even like I said, just even simplifying that to like, you know, it's okay and you're okay,
Yeah.
I think is
Hmm.
is really it. I mean, that's again, that's another like deep breath for a lot of our experience, trying to fit in, trying to learn to love ourselves,
Hmm.
trying to all the different things, and just it's okay. It's okay. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. In a slightly different, lane,
Hmm.
what are maybe two or three things that you wish the world knew or built more capacity for?
That's a hard one. There's so much.
Right.
Good question. I
Mhm.
think honestly, we're making mistakes
Mhm. Mhm.
because
Mhm.
I think our world is so obsessed with being perfect in
Mhm.
any capacity. And
Mhm.
so really making and it's when someone tries to make things better, it's like they gotta try or like the company's trying to be progressive. It's okay to make mistakes,
Mhm.
you know. And so I talk to like when I work with companies, I'm like, I don't know everything. Yes,
Mhm.
I'm more of an expert, but I'm willing to continue to learn and to learn new things alongside you.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and so just providing that space to make mistakes and to build more safe environments for people to feel included and
Mhm.
feel like they belong.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, especially with disability, being neurodivergent, because there's no one right way to be that way, and there's no right way to be human, frankly.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's being really understanding that's like, you can make mistakes here. It's okay.
Mhm.
Like you said, I see your heart. I trust your heart.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, really understanding that it's okay to make mistakes, and that when you create those safe environments and provide those structures and start dismantling some of the systems that already exist,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you're even just starting to question the system. It's like, why
Mhm.
is the company like that? Why is
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
country like all these different
Mhm.
things? And just starting to question and try to make space for all of us.
Yeah. I really love that, and the word that stuck out as you were talking about that, because it's like um uh, the hot button is not necessarily the word that I'm thinking of, but when you talked about expert, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think expert is this um multidimensional word for a lot of us because one, it can come from this like imposter syndrome angle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where we like, oh, I'm not an expert, like I don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say for a lot of us as neurodivergent people, we can be harder on ourselves in that way, right? We feel like we have to have even more
Mm-hmm.
capacity and knowledge and before we'll say that we're an expert. And when we kind of know, like, it's one of those funny things where it's like, you actually know more than whatever 90% of the people on this topic, right? Like you're already you're an expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
um uh and I also would say, you know at the same time, on the flip side, sometimes we can consider ourselves experts and not maintain that curiosity, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
feel like we've got it all figured out, and if somebody tries to add to that, we can feel like, well, I'm the expert here. Like you can't. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like you must have this capacity for realizing that there is going to always be this gap, and that gap is really an opportunity. And frankly, realize that you'll never understand 100% of everything. So respect yourself as an expert. Like still big
Mm-hmm.
yourself up, still acknowledge all the work that you put in, but also at the same time remain open to um, making mistakes or just not having all the answers and saying, well, let's figure it out together. I think is,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I'm just trying to mirror and reflect back what you said. You know, which I think, like I said, is just a really, really important point.
I,
Um,
I remember when I was making my website, it said, um, hire me to do the work, or like, something along those lines, like, um, and I changed it to let's do the work together, because
mm,
I was like, and I say that all the time to, like, when I do consultations, when I'm actually working with my clients, I'm like, they're like, well, you're the consultant. And I think a lot of times,
mhm,
HR slash diversity, inclusion, and accessibility consultant. And so I'm just like, I feel like as a consultant, though, I take more of a coaching, but I don't like the term coach in this case.
mm,
And so but it's like, no, we're doing this work together. I'm going to learn from you what you're doing. Because sometimes I talk
mhm,
to these companies and they're doing things really well. They just don't know that they're doing it well. And so it's important. I'm
mhm,
like, hey, no, you're doing that really well. Keep it up. There's
mhm,
other
mhm.
areas that need some work, and that's where I can
Right,
help.
right, right, right,
But
right.
these areas, and so just really understanding that they're like, well, you're the expert. And it's like, I have the lived experience that, I lots of work
Mhm,
to be from a kind of an objective point of view sometimes, an
mhm,
expert in making inclusive workplaces. But I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm understanding that I I feel like in order to really be an expert, you just like, yeah, you have 90% more, like you said, knowledge than other people, like you
right,
said,
right.
but also be willing to learn and to grow and to continuously build on that skill set, to build on that knowledge, to have that continuous curiosity that you talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that, and I love that um you frame it in that way for people and kind of set that up, because again, there are some people who come in and they're like, I'm expert, here's the 15 different things and this, and it's like, you're gonna run into some stuff where
Mm-hmm.
this kind of cookie cutter way of going about
Mm-hmm.
it, it's not necessarily going to be a fit.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do then, right? Like, what do you do then? So yeah, I'm all on board with that. And so um yeah, why don't, as we kind of close out, why don't you tell us if you have any projects that you're working on, or if there's some new things that you kind of have going on with the business. um you know Let us know about that, and any ways in which folks can reach out and find you, and get access to this expertise we just talked about.
Yes, so I'm doing a lot of policy work right now. I
Mm.
call it Policy Land, and then I made neurotypicals and neurodivergents alike that I work with start to use that terminology. Like, oh,
Mm.
I'm in Policy Land today, and it's so funny. Um, yeah, so working on a lot of policies to make sure companies are more inclusive and
Hmm.
accessible for all.
Hmm.
Um, I'm doing my first training of the year tomorrow for a big company, which I'm really excited about.
Mm. Good luck.
Thank you.
Hmm.
And if you want to follow me along on my journey, you can follow me at Accessible Crates on Instagram, also on LinkedIn. And you can
Hmm.
also follow me on LinkedIn at Sydney Elaine Butler. And yeah, and then I have a Calendly link, but if you reach out to me on either Instagram or LinkedIn, we can connect that way, and then I can share that with you if you want to chat more and learn more.
Okay. Yeah, I'm so grateful that we found some time to link and have this conversation. This has been great, and I look forward to having you back through. I think um, because for most corporate, or whatever, just having a job is such a central part of our existence, right? That
Mm-hmm.
having folks come through and talk about, again, what kind of work can we do, what kind of work's currently being done, and just sharing as well. I know um, one of the things, just in general, even without getting to that part, but just talking about the ways in which our, as they say, neural spiciness
Mm-hmm.
makes our world better. Because I think too, one of the challenges that folks have, and I said it's a goal of mine for this podcast, is to move us from deficient to difference, right? And that, again, having you come through and, as you're shining and doing great things, be able to speak to that and let folks know that, we exist, we're doing some cool things in the world. And it's not despite those
Mm-hmm.
things, right? A lot of those things are being fed by the ways in which we see the world different. So Sydney, thank you so much again for coming through. It's been a pleasure.
Again, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. All right. Thank you for joining me for another episode of I Must Be Bugged. I hope you've learned something, became curious, and most importantly, felt affirmed by what you heard. Remember, this podcast is all about sharing compassionate narratives about who we are and how we contribute to the beautiful and necessary diversity of humanity. This is our place to unmask and just be. Don't forget to connect with me on IG at I Must Be Buggin', where I'm eager to see you share your thoughts, your experiences, and your stories. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Leave a review and subscribe. It helps others who are eager for community find our people. So thank you again for being a part of the I Must Be Buggin' community. I can't wait for the next episode. Until then, stay up and enjoy who you were meant to be. And remember, you're not bugging, you're brilliant.